Hi everyone, it's Dr. RAMANI. Welcome back to this YouTube channel on narcissism. So I'm going to start by putting something out here because I think it's probably something a lot of you may identify with. Can you ever think of a situation in your life where you were kind of in maybe a scary place? Like there was a scary person, a parent, a teacher, a coach, somebody who had some authority, a boss, somebody had authority. And they were making an example of someone. Somebody might even not have made such a big mistake. Maybe they were a little late. Maybe they made a small mistake. But that tyrannical person just totally tears them apart. I want you to think about if you've ever been in a situation like that, which I think most of us have, and think about how it affected your behavior in that situation going forward. And in today's video, we're going to talk a little bit about how this dynamic plays, particularly with the scapegoat, and generally how the sacrifice of the scapegoat, because it's usually the scapegoat who's sacrificed in a narcissistic system, how the sacrifice of that scapegoat is a technique for the narcissist to keep everyone in line. So when you think about that scenario I laid out for you, I guess a lot of us can identify with that and be like, ooh, I better never fall out of line with this group, right? The scapegoat is the psychological sacrificial lamb, or I guess goat, of the narcissistic family system. They get the worst of all of it. They get the worst of the verbal abuse, they get the worst of the gaslighting, and they're always on the wrong pole of the triangulation. It is a terrible role to be in. Scapegoated people can suffer a lifetime from being placed in this role, either because they still have contact with the narcissistic family system and face their cruelty for decades, or even if they do cut off from them, the internalization of the emotional cruelty can find scapegoats facing down adulthood with complex trauma, anxiety, and a diminished sense of self and self-worth. So none of this is good. Being a scapegoat, not good. During the most recent month in my healing program, and if you're interested in that, you can go take a look at the video notes. There's a link to that. But during the most recent month in my healing program, we took on this issue of roles. And one question that came up repeatedly was, does the narcissistic person specifically choose the scapegoat? How do they make the decision of who to scapegoat? And my response to that is that it's not a conscious process. The narcissist isn't rubbing their hands together and calculating who the scapegoat is. The scapegoat in a system ends up being the scapegoat for so many different reasons, in a family certainly. Birth order, gender, appearance, abilities, interests, many, many other things. In fact, the narcissistic parent doesn't even believe they are scapegoating the child. They will blame the child for anything that is going wrong, and that parent, that narcissistic parent, likely views themselves as a wonderful parent who is above reproach. But the narcissistic person or parent uses the scapegoat for an abusive power play that affects everyone in the family system, even if you aren't a scapegoat. And it is a technique, interestingly, that ends up being used by narcissistic people in all kinds of narcissistically abusive systems, including workplaces, cults, church and spiritual communities, political communities, you name it. What the narcissistic person does is they turn the scapegoated person into an example. Watching the scapegoat be threatened, verbally abused, and abandoned for being bad may be done publicly to serve as a reminder to others of what happens if you break ranks or let the narcissistic person down, a sort of public pillory in the town square to warn others off from daring to exert themselves or make a mistake. The sad issue here is that the scapegoat is often not even trying to exert their autonomy or anything like that. They're just living their lives, might have done a small thing that the narcissist didn't like, and they're just the easiest target for the narcissistic person. But by turning the scapegoat into a public example, the fear of being ostracized or abused is enough to generate compliance from everyone else in the system. It's clear how this can happen with children in a family, because children are so disempowered by their age and by the nature of how families work. They just don't have any power in the family. But this happens in workplaces all the time, when the bullying boss dresses someone down in front of everyone and everybody else learns to shut up and keep out of the boss's way. In cult-like settings, anybody who dares to speak out against the cult leader may find themselves facing demotion, punishment, ostracism, and used as an example of the misery that can follow from speaking out against the psychopathy and tyranny of a cult-like personality, or anyone who sort of holds too much power in a spiritual community and uses cruelty as a way of maintaining control. Narcissistic, psychopathic, antagonistic people, they maintain their power by fear. Most of us don't want to be abused. And if we are at all disempowered, either because we're children, or reliant on a job, or simply want to be part of a community that we value for some reason, then seeing that someone can be brought down and harmed is enough to make most people fall into line. And the scapegoat often becomes the easy target for the narcissistic person to use as the example. And it often isn't about how much they malign the scapegoat, as it is about the scapegoat almost becoming a twisted and indirect source of narcissistic supply, because the public harming or shaming or abusing of the scapegoat means that they will get less pushback and more compliance from other people in that system. It really disgusts me that this can happen in a system and the harm that comes to scapegoats. But understanding this dynamic and the functions, one more function that scapegoats serve in these systems and allow narcissistic people to maintain their power, can shed more light on how powerful and the narcissistic person's quest for power is. They will pursue it. And it doesn't matter how many people get hurt. And in fact, using someone, again, you see this kind of brutality, you see it in prisons, you see it in any kind of situation where there's tyrannical leadership and there's an attempt to maintain control. That you will see a boss do this, you will see, again, a spiritual leader, you'll see it in a prison, you'll see it in a family. But it is making the example of someone perceived as weaker or an easy target that then gets everyone in line. And where this is harmful, it's one thing if it's happening with adults, again, in a business or a prison or a cult. It's quite another when we recognize that a child could be commandeered by a harmful parent simply to make them an example and allow there to be control in that system going forward. Not okay. And thanks again.